My parents liked my twin sister more than me. They spent all the money they were saving for my wedding on her. So I stopped talking to them after saying no to my mom's selfish request. I'm 23 years old and have a twin sister named Allison. We don't get along. Actually, we don't even talk. The same goes for my parents. We used to talk even though they didn't treat me well. But for the past 2 years, I've stayed away from them, and they haven't tried to contact me until now. Allison is 12 minutes older than me, so she's automatically the favorite because she's older. My parents only wanted one child because that's what they had planned for, and they couldn't afford to raise two. But when they found out they were having twins, it was too late to change their plans, and Mom didn't want to take any risks. I learned about this when I was in high school from my uncle, who was drunk at a Thanksgiving party. That was the day I gave up trying to make my parents like me. In those circumstances, they did the most typical thing. They had 2 children but chose to only love one, which happened to be Allison, not me. Since we were kids, the competition between me and Allison was intense. Whatever she did, I tried to do better just to get our parents' approval, but it only made them dislike me more for outshining their favorite. Honestly, Allison wasn't even that interested in being better than me. She just wanted people to praise her, so she pretended to care about our competition. I have to admit, she was skilled at manipulation, making people believe she was genuinely hurt when I outdid her. This resulted in many people validating her and putting me down to make her feel better. These people included my parents, some relatives, and even some classmates from high school. So in the end, I got good grades and participated in many activities to outshine my sister, while she received attention, validation, and sympathy from my parents and others because I was seen as the bad guy for overshadowing her. Looking back, I wouldn't change my achievements, but I do wish I had rubbed them in her face more. Then 2 years ago, we turned 21 and had both graduated. She graduated from a regular college, while I graduated from one of the top business schools in the state. Not only that, I was the valedictorian and had received a scholarship, which saved my parents a lot of money on my education. You might think I'm crazy, but I actually hoped my parents would be happy for me. Instead, they focused all their attention on Allison and her uncertain future because she had barely passed her studies. Both of us had moved back home, but while I was already working as an intern from home, Allison was struggling to find a job and facing rejection after rejection. My parents were more concerned about her, barely acknowledging my achievements or congratulating me. I wasn't surprised, but I was definitely disappointed. I tried to hide my feelings because I was still living with them and hadn't saved enough to move out yet, so I kept quiet about how hurt I was. But after our 21st birthday, I couldn't take it anymore. I expected them to do something special for us. But the day before our birthday, I found out they had all gone to the beach with Allison and her friends, leaving me alone at home with just a note and a $50 gift card. I felt utterly shattered. They had taken Allison on a beach trip while I got nothing but a brief note and a small gift. Many things have been unfair in my childhood, but this was the last straw. It was so disappointing and heartless that I decided to move out that very day and never look back. I had a few friends who offered to let me stay with them until I could find my own place, which wouldn't take long because the company I was interning at was likely going to hire me after the internship. So I only needed a place to stay for a maximum of 2 months. I packed my things and moved in with a friend without telling my parents or sister, and I haven't looked back since. They didn't miss me enough to ask me to come back. They did call me the day after I moved out, but not to wish me a happy birthday. They wanted to inform me that they'd be back soon and mentioned that I should probably fix the leaky tap. I told them I had moved out, hoping for some kind of reaction, but there was none. My parents seemed fine with it, and Allison didn't care. That was the last meaningful conversation I had with my family. Since then, I haven't visited them, and they haven't reached out to me either. Occasionally, I'd hear about Allison from my friends, but that was the extent of my knowledge about her life. They were unaware of my parents, and my parents knew little about me. Over the past 2 years, I've worked hard and now have my own place. It's not extravagant, but it's a comfortable apartment in a good neighborhood. The rent is manageable with my income, which is quite an achievement considering the struggles many people my age face. I'm content with how my life has unfolded, and I've made a conscious effort to keep thoughts of my family at bay. I recently learned that Allison got married to a businessman much older than her and is now enjoying life in California. I thought everything was fine with my family until 2 days ago when my uncle called, informing me that my parents had been in a serious car accident and wanted to see me urgently. I hurried to the hospital as soon as I could because, despite everything, I'm not heartless. When I arrived, I learned that they had already been there for a couple of days, recovering from their injuries. Their car had been hit by a truck, and although they survived, they were seriously hurt. Unfortunately, they didn't have health insurance because my dad believed in self-sufficiency and thought we wouldn't need hospital care. It's one of the most absurd beliefs I've ever encountered. They had initially reached out to my sister, but she refused to come back or assist them. She felt it was inappropriate for our parents to ask for financial help from her wealthy husbands so soon after her wedding. She didn't want to appear like a gold digger to her spouse. She refused to return because she felt she couldn't abandon her home and her 2 stepchildren, who weren't biologically hers, but her husband's from a previous marriage. She was busy playing the role of a happy family with her husband's relatives, neglecting her own parents in the hospital after a severe car accident. Even as she wanted to help with the bills, she couldn't afford to, as she was solely dependent on her husband. It was a harsh reality check, shattering the illusion of being the favored daughter and the golden child. I was shocked that they hadn't even bothered to contact me first. When my uncle mentioned that my parents now expected me to cover their medical expenses, I was furious. The amount was substantial, and it would take me a long time to recover financially. I hesitated to spend so much, especially on people who had never shown me any love or care throughout my life. I knew they had other family members who could take care of them, and even if I didn't pay, someone else would step in. It's just that it would be more embarrassing for them to borrow money from others, and they'll likely have to repay it much sooner than they would have to repay me. They explained this while asking me to cover the bills and even promised a quick repayment. So I'm torn. I can either refuse to pay, saving myself from humiliation, or I can cover their expenses, sacrificing my own money and waiting for reimbursement. Honestly, I'm not inclined to help them at all. We haven't spoken in 2 years, and our relationship has been strained for as long as I can remember. They feel like strangers to me now, so I don't feel compelled to assist them. But then again, if I don't help, I'm no better than Allison, which is disheartening. So I'm unsure what to do. Update 1. Hi there, I've made the tough decision not to assist my parents. It wasn't easy, but I'm confident their medical expenses will be covered by other means. They only reached out to me because they were too proud to ask other relatives for help. I haven't informed them of my decision yet. How do you even begin to tell your family you won't be assisting with their medical bills after a serious accident? It's been nearly 5 days since I last saw them, and after reflecting on the comments, I realized I was still unconsciously competing with Allison. Seeing that she didn't offer assistance to our parents, I felt compelled to prove I was the better daughter. I suppose I'll always have that competitive streak, no matter how hard I try. It's become a part of who I am. Many comments rightfully criticized my parents' lack of health insurance, and I couldn't agree more. My father's decision to forego insurance, thinking he was a flawless driver, was incredibly foolish. If I had been involved in their lives, I would have insisted on insurance. He didn't even insure his car, which adds to the recklessness of his choices. They're fortunate that the accident was the truck driver's fault. Otherwise, they'd be responsible for covering the car repairs as well. As for their financial situation, which many of you inquired about, I'd say my parents are comfortable. They're neither wealthy nor struggling. My dad holds a managerial position in his company, and my mom works in HR at a smaller firm. Together, their income is sufficient, especially now that they no longer have to support me or Allison. While growing up, we never faced financial stress, but we also couldn't live extravagantly. We were solidly middle class, and that hasn't changed. I can't understand why my parents wouldn't be able to cover their own medical bills. If they can borrow money with the promise of repayment, they should be able to manage their expenses themselves. They haven't explained the reason to me, and I doubt I'll find out anytime soon. Update 2. I finally mustered the courage to inform my parents that I wouldn't be assisting with their expenses. They had been calling me persistently for the past week, and yesterday I realized I couldn't keep ignoring them until they were discharged from the hospital. So I answered their calls and explained my decision. As expected, they didn't react well. My mom unleashed her anger on me, despite her broken ribs, accusing me of being ungrateful, among other things. My dad simply disowned me and hung up after my mom finished berating me. Surprisingly, their reaction didn't hurt as much as I anticipated. I realized I hadn't felt loved by them in a long time. They hadn't made any effort to contact me or check on me for 2 years after I moved out following their neglect on an important birthday. So I've never really had parents anyway. I'll just continue living my life as I have been for the past 2 years, and even before that. Their reaction doesn't affect me as much as they thought it would. After the call with my parents, my uncle called to give me an earful, but I hung up after a few seconds because I didn't need that negativity from others. Whatever they think of me doesn't matter anymore. My uncle later texted me, informing me that my parents had decided to use the money from the fund they had set aside for our wedding, now that they were in need. They had already used more than half of the wedding fund for Allison's wedding, and whatever was left they spent on a trip to Europe. This left them with little savings, explaining why they couldn't cover their own expenses. So that mystery was solved. My uncle may have intended to make me feel guilty, but instead I felt relieved that I hadn't contributed my hard-earned money to my parents' bills. Their irresponsible spending was their own doing, not mine. Their lack of insurance due to their delusional beliefs wasn't my responsibility either. They could turn to their relatives for help or fend for themselves. I wasn't giving them anything. They were no longer entitled to my time or my money. Update 3. Something really strange happened today, and I need to talk about it. I haven't been able to confide in my friends because most of them don't know much about my family history, and I'm not ready to share it with them yet. So I'm turning to Reddit for support. It's been almost 2 weeks since I last spoke to my parents. A few hours ago in the evening, Allison unexpectedly showed up at my doorstep. I was taken aback by her sudden visit, especially because I didn't think she knew where I lived. It turns out one of our old high school friends disclosed the neighborhood I lived in, and Allison went to great lengths to locate me, which was surprising given our strained relationship. She also looks and acts very differently from what I remembered. She's become more refined and sophisticated, I think, and that's been a huge difference because earlier she used to talk like she was still in high school. But now she sounds more laddie-like somehow and even behaves better. Her way of dressing has changed, the jewelry she wears has changed, and even her makeup. It actually felt like I wasn't even talking to Allison today. Everything about her is aged all of a sudden, but one thing that hasn't changed is how she is a person. I guess you cannot put makeup on your heart and tell people to call it Mrs. Davis, like she did with herself. Her personality and beliefs haven't undergone any renovation for sure. I let her in after she knocked at my door, and I was really surprised to see her, but I was also curious to know why she'd come by, so I decided to talk to her. After some small talk about her life, where she told me everything that she'd been up to unprompted and bragged about how fabulous her life was as a stay-at-home mom of 2 toddlers married to a wealthy guy without anything to worry about except for her cuticles. I waited for her to get to the point while politely nodding at her boring speech about how wonderfully underrated being a traditional housewife was. She was even advising me to do the same, so I really couldn't wait for her to finish talking about irrelevant things and get to the damn point, which she did after about 15 minutes of talking about her life. She explained that she had returned on her own initiative because our parents had been pleading for her to visit them after the accident. They didn't ask for her financial assistance, but simply wanted her presence. After 2 weeks, she finally decided to come back and thought it was also an opportunity to reconcile with me. However, things took a turn when she began venting about our parents' neediness and how they were disrespecting her new family. She complained about having to leave her 2 children with their nanny just to visit them, expressing frustration at being forced to choose between her parents and her own kids. I couldn't comprehend why she kept referring to her stepchildren as her own. She divulged a lot about her marriage and her husband, unsolicited. From what I gathered, it seemed like her husband had only married her to improve his chances of gaining partial custody of his children, which he successfully achieved. She believed he genuinely cared for her. He had been embroiled in a custody battle for some time, being a busy businessman unable to dedicate enough time to his children. His ex-wife used this against him until he announced his engagement, signaling stability, which swayed the court in his favor. Allison proudly recounted how she had stepped in to save these children, but to me, it seemed like her husband had manipulated her. Their relationship had barely lasted a year before he proposed, indicating that his motives might not have been purely romantic. It's unlikely that genuine love blossoms so quickly, especially after a divorce. Perhaps Allison was oblivious to this or chose to overlook it for financial security, content with being a glorified nanny to her husband's children. Furthermore, she resented her own parents for expecting her presence after their serious accident, feeling it encroached on her time with her new family. Her new family, however, comprised a husband who may not have held much affection for her and two unrelated children who were just as content with their nanny as they were with her. If there ever was a picture-perfect definition of ungratefulness, it would be embodied by Allison. Though I'm no champion of my parents, hearing her complain about their alleged neediness left me astounded. It was hard to believe that this was the same girl they had favored repeatedly over me. Eventually, she got to the purpose of her visit and informed me she would depart in 2 days. Despite promising our parents she would stay for a month, she felt exhausted from their repetitive recounting of the accident and their ordeal, claiming she needed to return home soon. Now, she expected me to reconcile with our parents and essentially take her place, relieving her of the guilt of abandoning them in their time of need. Unaware that our parents had severed ties with me once again due to my refusal to cover their expenses, she likely assumed they hadn't mentioned it to her, as they rarely talk about me. She sought sympathy from me for having to deal with our parents and leaving her own family behind. Her plan was to leverage this sympathy to manipulate me into becoming our parents' emotional support, as she didn't feel capable of fulfilling that role herself. It was a classic tactic of Allison's, but I saw through it and refused to play along. I had no intention of revealing this to her during her stay at my house, knowing it would lead to conflict. Instead, I gave her a vague assurance that I would try to reconcile, though I knew I had no intention of doing so. She left after urging me to stay in touch, though we both knew she didn't mean it. Frankly, I was relieved to see her go. Not only was she a self-centered and manipulative individual, but she was also dreadfully dull to converse with. Her monotonous tales of life in California left little room for meaningful dialogue. Her life seems to revolve around parties, her stepchildren, and her husband. While she believes she's living the dream, I find it rather pitiful. It's evident that her husband's affection is lacking, and with her stepchildren spending significant time with their biological mother, it's likely they'll always favor her. Yet this is the path she has chosen, and as for me, I'm determined to create a life far removed from my family. Today reaffirmed my decision to distance myself from my parents and sister. They're selfish and callous, with little regard for anyone but themselves, especially Allison. It's disheartening to be associated with such individuals. However, I finally cut ties with all of them, blocking their contacts to ensure my peace of mind. I hope they respect my boundaries and refrain from contacting me in the future. I'm better off without them, and I pray it stays that way.
The day John and I met at the quaint cafe, I couldn't have anticipated the beautiful love story that was about to unfold. As I waited in line to order my coffee, my eyes caught a glimpse of him standing at the counter, smiling warmly at the barista. He was tall, with a rugged charm that immediately drew me in. As fate would have it, we both reached for the last cinnamon muffin at the same time. Our hands brushed, and we shared a laugh, breaking the ice that had formed between two strangers. He insisted I take the muffin, and I couldn't resist his genuine kindness. That was the moment our connection began. "Do you come here often?" he asked with a twinkle in his eyes. "Actually, it's my favorite spot in town. I replied, feeling an unexpected flutter in my heart. From that day on, we kept running into each other at the cafe, and each meeting felt more like destiny. Our conversations flowed effortlessly, as if we had known each other for ages. We bonded over our love for literature, travel, and dreams of a happy family. One evening, as we strolled hand in hand along the park, he turned to me with a playful grin. "You know, I think this is more than just chance. It's like the universe wanted us to meet." I blushed, feeling my heart skip a beat. I believe in fate too, and if it brought us together, then I'm grateful for it. As our love blossomed rapidly, and before long, we knew we were meant to be together. When John proposed, it was everything I had dreamed of, a romantic evening under a starlight sky, with the sound of soft music playing in the background. He got down on one knee, and tears welled up in my eyes as I said yes. The wedding day was pure magic. Surrounded by friends and family, we exchanged heartfelt vows, promising to stand by each other through thick and thin. As we danced together for the first time as husband and wife, I felt like I was floating on air. This was the beginning of our happily ever after. And so the next few months, we settled into our new home, a charming white house with a beautiful garden. We would spend evenings cuddled on the couch, planning our future together, and it felt like we were invincible. But as with all fairy tales, clouds can appear on the horizon, and life took an unexpected turn. John's behaviors started to change, and we found ourselves arguing over insignificant things. Our once blissful nights were replaced with tense silence, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Little did I know that our beautiful beginning was about to be tested, leading us down a tumultuous path we never imagined. As the days turned into weeks, John's strange behavior persisted, and the happiness we once shared seemed to slip through our fingers. I tried my best to talk to him, to understand what was bothering him, but he always dismissed my concerns with vague excuses. One evening, after a particularly tense argument, I sat on the edge of our bed, feeling the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. John stood by the window, staring out into the night, and the distance between us seemed immeasurable. "John, please talk to me," I pleaded, my voice trembling with emotion. He turned towards me, his expression guarded. "It's just work stress, Margaret. You know how demanding my job can be, but we used to share everything, John. I want to be there for you, to support you," I said, feeling the tears welling up. He sighed, avoiding my gaze. "I appreciate that, but I need to handle this on my own. It's not about you." His words stung, and I felt a pang of hurt deep within. The warmth that once radiated from him was replaced by an icy detachment that left me feeling isolated. The next morning, I attempted to reach out again, hoping for a glimmer of the man I fell in love with. As we sat across from each other at the breakfast table, I mustered up the courage to broach the topic. "And I miss us. I miss the laughter, the conversations, the intimacy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. He glanced up briefly, but his eyes seemed distant, almost empty. "I'm sorry, Margaret. I'm just not in the right headspace right now. I need some time alone." I felt a lump forming in my throat, struggling to hold back tears. "Alone, but we're supposed to be in this together. Please, let me help you." He shook his head, pushing his plate away. "I need to figure things out on my own. Maybe we just need some space." And with that, he left for work, leaving me feeling more lost than ever. The days turned into weeks, and the divide between us grew wider. We slept in separate rooms, and every attempt to connect with him was met with silence or indifference. One night, I couldn't take it any longer, and my frustration spilled over into anger. "You can't keep shutting me out, John. We're supposed to be a team facing life's challenges together." His face hardened, and he snapped back. "Well, maybe you're part of the problem, Margaret. I need space from your constant nagging and insecurities." Tears streamed down my face as his words cut deep into my heart. I had always trusted him and believed in our love, but now doubt crept in like a dark shadow. As time passed, John's behavior became even more erratic. He started coming home late, often reeking of alcohol, and he always had an excuse about work or hanging out with friends. I began to wonder if there was someone else, but I pushed that thought away, unwilling to believe it. The beautiful beginning of our love story now felt like a distant memory, and the storm brewing in our relationship threatened to shatter the happiness we once knew. I couldn't help but feel that something was seriously wrong, but I had no idea just how much my life was about to be turned upside down. As the turbulence in our marriage continued, I began to feel a deep sense of unease and uncertainty. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I needed to protect myself, just in case things took a turn for the worse. It was then that I decided to buy a small safe and start saving money secretly. Late at night, when John was out, I would carefully count the cash and place it inside the safe. It was my safety net, a lifeline should our marriage crumble completely. I felt guilty for keeping this from him, but I feared he might react negatively or take the money away if he knew. One evening, I sat in our bedroom, nervously counting the money for the umpteenth time when John unexpectedly entered the room. Panic surged through me, but I quickly closed the safe and tried to act casual. He raised an eyebrow, noticing my odd behavior. "What are you doing, Margaret? You look like you've seen a ghost." Trying to maintain composure, I forced a smile. "Oh, nothing, just tidying up a bit." He walked over and sat down next to me on the bed. "You seem distant lately. Is everything okay?" I hesitated, not knowing how to respond. I wanted to confide in him, to tell him about my worries and fears, but his recent coldness held me back. "I'm just tired, John. Maybe we could spend more time together like we used to," he sighed, seemingly preoccupied with his own thoughts. "I've been busy at work, you know that. But sure, let's plan a nice evening together soon." Relieved that he didn't pry further, I nodded, secretly hoping that we could rekindle the spark that seemed to have vanished. Days turned into weeks, and my secret stash of money grew steadily. I felt a strange mix of guilt and empowerment knowing that I had some form of security amid the turmoil. But I also couldn't shake off the nagging feeling that I shouldn't have to resort to such measures in a loving marriage. One night, as I counted the money yet again, I looked at my reflection in the bedroom mirror, contemplating the path our relationship was taking. "What happened to us, John?" I whispered to myself. "We used to be so happy." The days continued to blur, and as John's late nights became more frequent, I began to suspect that there was more to his behavior than just work stress. My instincts told me something was terribly wrong, and the money in the safe became a symbol of my growing mistrust. One evening, John stumbled into the house, reeking of alcohol, and collapsed on the couch. His slurred words broke my heart. "It's just a tough phase, Margaret. I promise things will get better." My frustration boiled over, and I couldn't hold back any longer. "But you're never here, you're always out, and you come back like this. I can't keep pretending everything is fine." He waved a dismissive hand, seemingly unaffected by my pain. I said, "I'm dealing with stuff, okay? I don't need you nagging me about it." Tears welled up in my eyes, hurt by his callousness. "I just want us to be happy again. I want us to talk and share our lives." He got up, unsteadily making his way to the bedroom, and paused at the door. "Just give me some space, Margaret. I need time to figure things out." As he closed the bedroom door, my heart sank and the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I needed to protect myself and the future I had once dreamed of. My secret stash of money now held a greater significance, not just as a safety net, but as a symbol of my strength in the face of uncertainty. The days following our heated argument were filled with a tense silence. John continued to come home late, and we barely spoke to each other. Every night, I would lie in bed, my heart heavy with worry and confusion, wondering how we had drifted so far apart. One fateful morning, as I was getting ready for work, my phone rang. I glanced at the caller ID and saw John's name. Taking a deep breath, I answered the call, hoping that maybe, just maybe, he wanted to talk and work things out. "Hello?" I said, my voice cautious. "Margaret," John's voice was strained. "We need to talk." My heart skipped a beat at the sound of his serious tone. "Of course, John. What's on your mind?" He hesitated before speaking. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I think it's best if we take a break from each other for a while." But the words hit me like a punch to the gut. A break. But I thought we could work through this together. "It's not that simple, Margaret," he replied, his voice sounding distant. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I struggled to find the right words. "Please, John, let's talk about this in person. We can figure things out together." "I can't do this right now, Margaret," he said firmly. "I need space, and I think it's best for both of us." "But I love you, John." I choked out, desperation creeping into my voice. His response was cold and indifferent. "I'm sorry, but I can't do this anymore. I need time away from everything." The call ended, leaving me stunned and heartbroken. I sank to the floor, clutching the phone tightly, trying to comprehend the sudden turn of events. It felt like the ground had been pulled from under me, and I was left floating in an abyss of uncertainty. In my distressed state, I decided to take the day off work and process everything that had happened. I felt lost and alone, unable to reach out to anyone for support as I hadn't shared the extent of our problems with friends or family. My heart ached for the love we once had, wondering where it all went wrong. Feeling restless and unable to stay cooped up in the house, I decided to go for a drive to clear my head. As I drove, my thoughts kept going back to the phone call, replaying the words over and over in my mind. Frustration and sadness welled up in me, and I couldn't help but call him back, hoping he had changed his mind. But the call went straight to voicemail, and I left a tearful message, pouring my heart out, begging him to reconsider. Distraught and overwhelmed, I tried to concentrate on the road ahead, but my emotions clouded my focus. As I approached an intersection, my phone buzzed with a new message notification. Instinctively, I reached for it, but in that split second, I lost sight of the road. Before I knew it, screeching tires and the sound of metal colliding filled the air. I had gotten into an accident. When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying in a hospital bed, surrounded by worried faces of medical staff. The doctor explained that I had suffered only minor injuries, mostly bruises and a few cuts. Miraculously, I had escaped serious harm. As I lay in that hospital bed, I couldn't help but think about the phone call that led to this disaster. The argument and the emotional distress it caused had distracted me from driving safely, putting my life at risk. I asked the doctor if my husband had come to check on me, hoping against hope that he would have come running after hearing about the accident. But the doctor's response was crushing. "No, I'm sorry, but no one has come to see you," the doctor said with a sympathetic look. The reality of our crumbling marriage hit me hard, and I felt an overwhelming sense of abandonment. The man I had loved and trusted had turned his back on me when I needed him the most. But as the doctor continued to talk, there was a glimmer of hope. He said my condition was improving faster than they expected, and I would be discharged 4 days early. A mix of emotions washed over me. Relief at the thought of leaving the hospital earlier and facing my shattered reality, and sadness at the realization that I was now truly alone. And with a heavy heart, I prepared myself to return home, uncertain of what I would find there. Little did I know that the pain and heartache were far from over, and that my life was about to take an even more drastic turn. As I returned home from the hospital, a wave of emptiness washed over me. The walls of our once happy home now felt like witnesses to a love lost. I searched for signs of John's presence, hoping that he would have returned to check on me after the accident, but there was nothing. On the kitchen table, I found a note written hastily in his handwriting. My heart pounded in my chest as I read the words that confirmed my worst fears. "Margaret, I'm leaving for another city. I can't do this anymore. Please don't try to find me. It's over." The pain of his betrayal cut deep, and the weight of abandonment crushed me. How could the man I loved simply walk away without a second thought? I wandered through the house, feeling the void of his absence. The rooms we once shared were now filled with memories, leaving me haunted by what once was. As I entered our bedroom, I noticed that all of his belongings were gone, our life together packed into boxes and taken away. But in that moment, I couldn't comprehend how our beautiful beginning had turned into this nightmare. I felt deceived, abandoned, and utterly broken. My eyes then landed on the small safe tucked away in the closet. My secret stash of money, the money that was meant to provide security for our future, was still there. But in the face of his betrayal, its significance had changed. It was no longer a lifeline, but a reminder of the trust I had misplaced. I opened the safe and checked the money inside. It was all still there. My savings, my hopes, and my dreams for a love that would endure. But the sense of betrayal overshadowed everything, leaving me feeling empty and lost. In the days that followed, I tried to cope with the pain and confusion, but it was a struggle. I couldn't escape the torment of unanswered questions. Why did he leave? What did I do wrong? Was our love not enough? I decided to seek closure, to find out the truth from the one person who might have answers. His parents, they had always been kind to me, and I couldn't fathom why their son had treated me so callously. With a heavy heart, I made my way to their house, unsure of what I would find. When I arrived, I was greeted by familiar faces, but their expressions held a mix of surprise and awkwardness. His mother, Mrs. Thompson, spoke first. "Margaret, what a surprise to see you. Is everything okay?" I took a deep breath, trying to hold back tears. "No, everything is not okay. John has left me and I don't understand why." "I thought you might have some answers." Her husband, Mr. Thompson, stepped forward, looking uneasy. "I'm sorry, Margaret, but if John has chosen to leave, it's his decision. We don't know why he did it, but don't you have any idea?" I pleaded, unable to mask my pain. Mrs. Thompson exchanged a nervous glance with her husband before replying. John said he was unhappy and he needed a fresh start. If he feels that way, it's up to him to decide what he wants to do. The words felt like a dagger to my heart. I had always considered them family, but their loyalty now seemed to lie with their son, regardless of the pain he had caused. But he didn't just leave. "He stole from me too," I said, trying to hold back the tears. Apparently their surprise was evident, and they exchanged worried glances. "Stole? What do you mean?" Mr. Thompson asked. I hesitated, unsure if I should reveal my secret, but the pain and anger pushed me forward. He took my savings, over $50,000, from the safe I had in our bedroom. Their shock turned to disbelief, and they looked at each other with concern. Mrs. Thompson finally spoke. "I can't believe he would do something like that. We didn't know anything about this." But the betrayal cut even deeper, and I felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. The people I thought I could turn to had nothing to offer me but disappointment. Feeling defeated, I decided to pursue legal action. I filed for divorce, seeking justice for the betrayal and theft. The courtroom became the battleground for our broken love story. And as the court proceedings unfolded, the truth came to light, revealing John's deception and callousness. The judge saw through his lies and deceit, ruling in my favor and ordering him to pay restitution of $200,000 for his actions. The divorce was finalized, marking the end of our once beautiful beginning. The pain and heartache were immeasurable, but I knew I had to find the strength to move forward. In the wake of the legal battles and emotional turmoil, I decided to let go of the toxic relationship that had shattered my dreams. Slowly, I picked up the pieces of my life and began to rebuild. The betrayal and desertion had wounded me deeply, but they also became the catalyst for my transformation. I vowed never to settle for anything less than genuine love and respect. Though the journey was painful, I found the courage to embrace my newfound independence and freedom. The beautiful beginning of my love story had turned into a painful chapter, but it was not the end. I had learned the hard way that sometimes life takes unexpected turns, and the true test lies in how we rise above the darkness and find our own path to happiness. The courtroom was filled with tension as John and I faced each other for the first time since our marriage had crumbled. Our once undeniable connection now felt like a distant memory, replaced by resentment and hurt. My lawyer stood by my side, a reassuring presence as we prepared to present the truth before the judge. I took a deep breath, determined to confront John and seek the justice I deserved. As the proceedings began, the judge's gaze fell upon me. "Mrs. Thompson, please share your side of the story." I cleared my throat, trying to steady my voice. "Your Honor, I loved my husband deeply, but he betrayed my trust and abandoned me without warning. Not only did he leave, but he also stole over $50,000 from me." The judge's stern expression showed that he was taking my words seriously. "Mr. Thompson, your response?" John's eyes avoided mine, and he spoke with an air of indifference. "Your Honor, I admit that our marriage was troubled, but I didn't steal anything. The money she speaks of was probably used for household expenses." Anger boiled within me, and I couldn't hold back my frustration. "That's not true. I kept that money in a safe, and I can prove it." My lawyer handed the evidence over to the court, a record of my savings and the empty safe. The judge examined the evidence, his face growing stern. "Mrs. Thompson, do you have any witnesses or other evidence to support your claim of betrayal and theft?" The judge inquired, agitated, not wanting to bring his parents into the proceedings, but I knew it was crucial to present the truth. "Yes, Your Honor. I spoke to John's parents and they confirmed that they had no knowledge of him stealing the money. In fact, they were just as shocked as I was." The judge raised an eyebrow, looking at John. Is this true, Mr. Thompson? John's parents had warned him not to drag them into the situation, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Your Honor, I apologize. I did take the money, but I needed it for personal reasons. I never meant to hurt her. The admission cut like a knife, and tears welled up in my eyes. How could the man I loved do this to me? The judge's stern gaze fixed on John. Mr. Thompson, your actions were deceitful and unjust. The court takes such matters seriously, and it is clear that your actions have caused significant harm to Mrs. Thompson. John's lawyer attempted to defend him, citing his remorse and willingness to make amends. But the damage was already done, and the truth had been revealed. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor, ordering John to pay restitution of $200,000 for the stolen money and emotional distress caused by his betrayal. He also granted the divorce, severing the last remnants of our once cherished love. As the courtroom emptied, I felt a mix of relief and sorrow. The legal battle was over, but the emotional scars were deep and would take time to heal. In the aftermath of the divorce, I focused on rebuilding my life. I found solace in the support of friends and family who stood by me through the darkest times. The money from the court settlement became a stepping stone for a new beginning, a chance to pursue my dreams and rediscover my worth. One day, as I walked through the city, I found myself passing by a little coffee shop, reminiscent of where John and I had first met. But this time, instead of sadness, I felt a sense of empowerment and renewal. As I stepped inside, the familiar smell of coffee filled the air, and I smiled as I ordered my favorite cinnamon muffin. I realized that the beautiful beginning of our love story had ended, but it was just the start of a new chapter. One filled with strength, growth, and the promise of a brighter future. As I savored the taste of the muffin, I made a silent promise to myself. I would never settle for anything less than genuine love and respect. My heart had been broken, but it had also grown stronger. And from that strength, I knew I would create my own happily ever after, on my own terms, with my head held high. The journey ahead would not be easy, but I was ready to face it with unwavering determination, armed with the lessons learned from my beautiful beginning and painful end.
As I reflect upon the beginning of my journey with John, it's impossible to ignore the inkling of doubt that lingered in my mind. Our early days were a whirlwind of laughter, stolen glances, and shared dreams. John was everything I had ever hoped for in a partner: caring, witty, and endlessly supportive. But beneath the surface of our budding love story, there was a shadow that threatened to cast doubt over our future together: his mother. I remember the first time he opened up about her. We were sitting on a park bench, hands intertwined, when he turned to me with a look of seriousness I had never seen before. "Mary," he began, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon, "there's something you need to know about my mother." I urged him to continue, a mixture of curiosity and concern swirling within me. John's eyes held a depth of pain, as if recounting these stories was reopening old wounds. "My relationship with my mother is complicated," he confessed, his voice carrying a hint of resignation. "She's not what she appears to be." I leaned in, searching his eyes for the truth behind his words. "What do you mean?" John sighed, his fingers nervously tracing patterns on the back of my hand. "She's manipulative, Mary. She has a way of getting what she wants, no matter the cost. I've seen her tear apart families, destroy friendships, and I've even felt her influence in my own life." I couldn't help but feel a knot tighten in my stomach. The woman he described seemed like a character from a thriller, not a real-life mother. "But why does she do all this?" I asked, struggling to comprehend the complexity of his narrative. He looked at me, his eyes holding a mixture of sadness and frustration. "Money, power, control, those are her motivations. And she'll stop at nothing to achieve them." I took a moment to process his words, a sense of unease settling over me. Could his stories really be true? Was it possible for a mother to be so conniving and heartless? Before I could voice my doubts, John continued, his voice tinged with a hint of bitterness. "I've kept my distance from her for a reason, Mary. I don't want her toxic influence seeping into our relationship. But I also want you to be prepared. If we decide to take this journey together, you'll have to face her someday." I squeezed his hand gently, offering him a reassuring smile. "John, we're a team. I'll stand by your side no matter what challenges come our way." He nodded, his gaze finally meeting mine with a mixture of gratitude and relief. "Thank you, Mary. Just promise me you'll always remember what I've told you. It's important that you understand the kind of person she truly is. Little did I know that those words of caution would shape the course of our future in ways I could never have anticipated. As I reflect upon that pivotal conversation, I can't help but wonder how much of an impact John's mother would truly have on our lives. The day of our wedding arrived with a mixture of excitement and nervous anticipation. The sun bathed the venue in a warm glow, casting a sense of magic over the entire scene. I stood at the altar, my heart racing as I waited for John to make his way to me. My bridal gown felt heavier than ever, laden not only with layers of fabric, but also with the weight of my emotions. As the music swelled and the guests turned to see the groom's arrival, I couldn't help but notice a subtle shift in the atmosphere. John's normally radiant smile seemed a touch strained, his eyes holding a hint of apprehension. My heart ached at the sight, but I brushed off the unease, chalking it up to pre-wedding jitters. As John finally stood before me, his hand extended to clasp mine, I caught a fleeting glance exchanged between him and his mother. It was a brief moment, but the intensity of their gaze was undeniable. A chill ran down my spine, and for the first time, I began to truly understand the gravity of his warnings about her. The ceremony proceeded, and as we exchanged our vows, the words felt both surreal and sacred. But when it was time for John's mother to give her speech, the air grew tense. Her smile was a facade, her eyes glittering with a coldness that sent shivers down my spine. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice dripping with honeyed venom, "today, we celebrate the union of two souls. Mary, my dear, you must truly be something special to have captured my son's heart." A smattering of uneasy laughter filled the air, and I felt the weight of her scrutiny settle upon me. "And while we toast to this beautiful occasion," she continued, her tone shifting subtly, "let us not forget that appearances can be deceiving. Let us remember that love is a delicate thread, easily broken by the slightest tug." Her words hung in the air like a dark cloud, casting a pall over the joyous celebration. I stole a glance at John, his jaw clenched and his grip on my hand tightening. His mother's words seemed to pierce through him, but he stood resolute, his eyes never leaving mine. In that moment, a fire ignited within me. I was determined to stand strong beside John, to prove that our love was unbreakable, no matter the challenges his mother presented. As the applause finally erupted, drowning out her last insidious words, I turned to John, a defiant smile playing on my lips. "I promise you," I whispered, my voice firm and unwavering, "no matter what storms come our way, we'll weather them together." He met my gaze, his eyes softening with gratitude and love. "Thank you, Mary. Your faith in us means the world to me." Little did I know that this would be the first of many battles we would face as a couple. The unveiling at the altar was just the beginning of a tumultuous journey, one that would test the limits of our love and resilience. And as I gazed into John's eyes, I knew that no matter what lay ahead, we were in it together. After the euphoria of our wedding day settled, John and I embarked on the journey of building a life together. Our new home became a sanctuary of love, laughter, and shared dreams. As we settled into the rhythm of our life, the memory of John's mother's warning lingered like a shadow, a constant reminder of the challenges we might face. Our days were filled with simple joys, cooking together in our cozy kitchen, debating the best way to arrange our furniture, and reveling in the comfort of each other's company. John's love and support never wavered, and I often found myself marveling at the depth of his commitment to our relationship. However, the specter of his mother's manipulation was never far from our thoughts. It began subtly, a request for money here, a veiled comment there. John, ever the protector, shielded me from the worst of it, but I couldn't help but notice the strain it placed on him. One evening, as we sat on the couch, a stack of bills on the coffee table before us, I broached the subject cautiously. "John," I began, my voice gentle, "I can't ignore the fact that your mother's requests for money seem to be increasing." He sighed, his gaze fixed on the bills. "Mary, it's complicated. She's been like this for as long as I can remember. She has a way of making me feel guilty, like I owe her something." I took his hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "You don't owe her anything, John. We're building our own life now, and we need to focus on our future." He met my eyes, gratitude and weariness warring within them. "I know, Mary. It's just hard to break free from that guilt sometimes." As the months went by, we faced the challenge head on. We worked together to set boundaries and make financial decisions that were best for us. It wasn't easy, and there were times when John's mother's manipulative tactics threatened to drive a wedge between us. But our love and determination prevailed. and we slowly began to find our footing. Despite the difficulties, we managed to save enough money to buy a house, a place that would truly be our own, free from the toxicity of John's mother's influence. With excitement in our hearts, we moved into our new home, ready to build a life that was uniquely ours. Little did I know that the challenges we had faced were merely a prelude to what was to come. As we settled into our new home, the true extent of John's mother's conniving nature would become painfully clear. But together, we would navigate these stormy waters, drawing strength from the love we had built and the promises we had made to one another. Our new house stood as a testament to our resilience and determination. With every room we decorated, every wall we painted, it became a haven of love, a sanctuary where the echoes of our laughter and dreams resided. As we settled into our new life, we decided to celebrate our accomplishment with a housewarming party, a joyful occasion that would bring our friends and family together. The day of the party arrived, and the sun bathed our backyard in a warm glow. The air was filled with the tantalizing aroma of barbecue, and the sound of laughter and chatter reverberated through the air. It was a picture, perfect scene, a snapshot of happiness that I hoped would erase the lingering shadows of our past. As guests mingled, sharing stories and admiring our new home, I couldn't help but notice John's mother's arrival. Her demeanor was polite, but there was a calculating gleam in her eyes that made my heart race. I exchanged a glance with John, a silent understanding passing between us. As the day wore on, the atmosphere shifted subtly. John's mother seemed strangely fixated on our house, her gaze lingering on every corner, every detail. She made small talk with our guests, but I could sense an undercurrent of tension in her interactions. It wasn't long before she approached us, a feigned smile on her lips. "John, Mary, I must say, your home is quite lovely." "Thank you," John replied politely, though there was a guardedness in his tone. She turned to me, her smile a touch too saccharine. "Mary, dear, have you ever considered trading houses?" I blinked in surprise, not quite sure I'd heard her correctly. "Yes," she continued, her eyes glinting with a hint of something I couldn't quite decipher. "My little old house has served me well, but your new home is so much more spacious and comfortable. I'm sure we could come to an arrangement." My heart raced as I processed her words. Was she actually suggesting what I thought she was? John's grip on my hand tightened, his jaw set in a firm line. "We appreciate the offer, but we're quite happy with our new home," John responded, his voice steady. Her smile faltered, replaced by a flash of irritation. "Are you sure? It's a generous offer, and I assure you my house holds sentimental value." I met her gaze with a mixture of disbelief and defiance. "This house holds sentimental value for us too, and we're not interested in trading." Her demeanor shifted, her eyes narrowing as a hint of anger flared within them. "Very well then, if that's your final decision." With that, she turned on her heel and walked away, leaving behind a palpable sense of tension. The party continued, but her presence cast a shadow over the festivities. As the day came to a close, I looked around at our friends and family, the people who had stood by us through thick and thin. Despite the unease that had punctuated the day, the sense of unity and support was undeniable. And as I glanced at John, I knew that together, we could weather any storm, even the looming threat of his mother's manipulation. Life has a way of throwing unexpected curveballs, and tragedy struck our lives when we least expected it. John fell ill, a rare and debilitating illness that left us both reeling. The once vibrant man who had stood by my side through thick and thin was now confined to a hospital bed, his strength fading with each passing day. I stood by his side, holding his hand as we faced the uncertain future together. The hospital room was a stark reminder that life could change in an instant, and the bonds we had forged were being put to the ultimate test. As the days turned into weeks, the reality of John's condition became undeniable. The doctor's words were a cruel echo of our worst fears, and I watched as he fought with every ounce of strength he had left. But the illness was unrelenting, and despite his determination, John's condition deteriorated. One day, as I sat by his bedside, his hand weakly grasping mine, he turned to me with a weary smile. "Mary, I want you to know that you've brought immeasurable joy into my life. No matter what happens, I want you to remember that." Tears welled up in my eyes, threatening to spill over. "John, don't talk like that. We're going to fight this together." He shook his head gently, his eyes holding a mixture of sadness and acceptance. "Mary, my love, sometimes we have to face the reality of the situation. I want you to be prepared for whatever comes next." As the days turned into nights, the hospital room became a cocoon of shared memories and whispered conversations. John's strength waned, and it was agonizing to watch him slip away, bit by bit. Then, one fateful day, John's battle came to an end. As I held his hand and watched his chest rise and fall for the last time, a sense of profound loss washed over me. The room was filled with an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of my heart shattering into a million pieces. The grief was overwhelming, and in the midst of my pain, his mother's presence loomed once again. As we gathered to mourn John's passing, she seized the opportunity to claim his belongings, the tangible reminders of a life that was cut short too soon. She approached me, a twisted smile on her lips, her eyes calculating. "Mary, dear, I think it's time we discuss what happens next." I looked at her, my grief mingling with anger. "Can't you see that I'm mourning the loss of my husband? Have some decency." Her smile didn't waver, her demeanor unapologetic. "Of course, dear, but I believe we have some matters to attend to. You see, John's possessions, his car, his personal belongings, they rightfully belong to me." My voice trembled with a mixture of grief and indignation. "How can you even think about these things right now? Have you no compassion?" Her eyes bore into mine, her tone dripping with venom. "It's a shame, really. He left us so suddenly, and without a will, his possessions default to his next of kin, which would be me." I clenched my fists, struggling to contain my anger. These belongings are not just objects, they're memories of a life we shared. They belong to me as much as they belong to you. She shrugged, as if my emotions were of no consequence. "Well, Mary, I'm willing to make a deal. I'll give you his belongings in exchange for the house." My heart pounded in my chest as I stared at her in disbelief. "You want me to give you our home? The home we built together?" She nodded, her eyes cold and calculating. "It's a fair trade, don't you think? You get his possessions, and I get a place to live." Anger surged through me, my grief fueling my resolve. "No, I won't let you take everything away from me. This house was our dream, our future." She smirked, her triumph evident. "Think about it, Mary. You can either walk away with some memories or lose everything." As I looked into her eyes, I saw a reflection of the manipulation and greed that had poisoned her relationship with her own son. My heart ached, not just for my loss, but for the realization that her influence would linger even after his passing. In that moment, I made a choice. A choice to honor John's memory, to protect the life we had built together, and to stand up against the darkness that had consumed his mother's soul. The battle that lay ahead would be one of wits and wills, a confrontation that would determine the fate of our shared dreams. And as I gazed at his mother, I knew that the lessons I had learned from John's stories and his love would guide me through the storm that was about to descend upon us. With John's passing, the weight of his mother's greed and manipulation bore down on me. Her ultimatum, a house in exchange for his belongings, hung over my head like a dark cloud, but I was determined not to let her strip away the last remnants of the life we had shared. I reached out to a lawyer I knew, someone who could help me navigate the legal complexities of this situation. Together, we devised a plan, a cunning scheme that would turn her own manipulative tactics against her. As the contracts were drafted and the details ironed out, I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. This was my chance to teach her a lesson, to expose her true nature to the world. I was ready to face the battle head on, armed with the truth and a carefully calculated plan. The day came to put the plan into action. I arranged a meeting with John's mother, my heart pounding with anticipation. The lawyer had assured me that our plan was legally sound, but the outcome was far from certain. As she entered the lawyer's office, her expression confident and haughty, I greeted her with a tight smile. "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Thompson." She waved a dismissive hand. "Let's not waste time with pleasantries. I assume you're ready to make the trade, his belongings for the house." I nodded, my resolve unwavering. "Yes, but before we proceed, there are a few formalities we need to go through." Her eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering within them. "Formalities?" I motioned for her to sit, gesturing towards the contracts that lay on the table. "You see, in order to ensure that everything is fair and legal, we've had a couple of contracts drawn up." She glanced at the contracts, her confidence seemingly unshaken. "Contracts? I thought this was a simple exchange." I held back a smirk, my heart racing as the moment of truth approached. "It is, but we want to make sure that everything is properly documented. After all, it's a significant transaction." She leaned back in her chair, a smug smile playing on her lips. "Fine, let's get this over with." As we began to review the contracts, I maintained an air of professionalism, carefully guiding her through the process. With each passing moment, her arrogance seemed to grow, her belief that she was outsmarting me becoming more apparent. Finally, the time came to sign the contracts. I handed her the pen, my heart pounding as I watched her scrawl her signature on the dotted line of the first contract, the one that supposedly outlined the exchange of our respective properties. "And now your signature on the second contract, please," I said, my voice steady. She picked up the pen again, a self-satisfied grin on her face. "I can't believe you're actually going through with this." As she signed the second contract, the trap was set. The contracts had been intentionally switched. The one she had just signed was the actual house exchange, while the first one was a fabrication meant to appease her. I smiled, a genuine sense of satisfaction washing over me. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mrs. Thompson." Her demeanor shifted from smugness to confusion as she handed me the signed contracts. "What's the meaning of this?" I met her gaze with unwavering resolve. "This is a fair trade, Mrs. Thompson, just as you proposed." As I looked into her eyes, I saw a reflection of the manipulation and greed that had poisoned her relationship with her own son. My heart ached, not just for my loss, but for the realization that her influence would linger even after his passing. In that moment, I made a choice to honor John's memory, to protect the life we had built together, and to stand up against the darkness that had consumed his mother's soul. The battle that lay ahead would be one of wits and wills, a confrontation that would determine the fate of our shared dreams. And as I gazed at his mother, I knew that the lessons I had learned from John's stories and his love would guide me through the storm that was about to descend upon us. The day of the party arrived, and the atmosphere was electric with anticipation. The once grand mansion of John's mother was now adorned with decorations and twinkling lights, a celebration of her supposed victory. Relatives and friends gathered, their voices a symphony of laughter and chatter as they toasted to her new home. I stood among the guests, my heart racing with a mixture of nervousness and determination. The plan had been set in motion, and I knew that this was the moment to unveil the truth. The truth about the woman who had tried to tear us apart, who had manipulated and schemed for her own gain. As the evening wore on, the mother-in-law's smugness was palpable. She moved through the crowd, basking in the attention, believing herself to be the master of the situation. But little did she know that the tables were about to turn. A hush fell over the crowd as I stepped forward, the spotlight suddenly on me. Her gaze turned towards me, curiosity and suspicion dancing within her eyes. I cleared my throat, my voice steady as I began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my tone carrying a weight of authority, "I would like to take a moment to share some truths with you all." The guests turned their attention to me, a mixture of surprise and confusion evident on their faces. The mother-in-law's smile wavered, her gaze narrowing as she studied me. "I stand before you today to shed light on a situation that has remained hidden for far too long," I continued, my gaze never leaving the mother-in-law's eyes. John's passing was a tragedy that left a void in my heart, but it also brought to the surface a web of manipulation and greed that had been woven by someone we all know. A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd, and I could see the mother-in-law's expression shifting from curiosity to alarm. "You see," I said, my voice unwavering, "my late husband and I devised a plan to ensure that justice was served. We knew the depths of manipulation and deceit that had tainted the relationship between a mother and her son." Gasps filled the air, and the mother-in-law's face turned pale as realization dawned upon her. She stepped forward, her voice trembling with a hint of desperation. "What are you talking about?" I held up a document, the contract she had signed, transferring her house to me. "This contract, signed by you, transfers ownership of your house to me." The shock in her eyes was undeniable, and the realization of her own downfall seemed to paralyze her. "I learned from the best," I said, a touch of bitterness in my tone. "I learned how to read between the lines, how to protect my interests, and how to expose manipulation. You were so focused on gaining material possessions that you failed to see the real treasures: love, compassion, and family." The guests watched in stunned silence, their eyes shifting between us. The mother-in-law's face contorted with anger and defeat. "You can't do this. This is my house. This is my house." I looked at her, my gaze unwavering. "You orchestrated your own downfall, just as you did with your relationship with John. You deserve the consequences of your actions." I turned to the crowd, my voice filled with resolve. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want you all to know the truth about this woman. I want you to know that her manipulation and greed have caused pain to those she claims to care about. But today, justice has been served. I invite you all to witness her departure from the house she thought she could claim. The mother-in-law was left speechless, her facade shattered as the truth was exposed for all to see. She had lost not only her ill-gotten possessions, but also the respect and trust of those around her. "Leave this house within 30 days, I said, my voice carrying a finality that left no room for negotiation. It's time to face the consequences of your actions. As the crowd began to disperse, whispers of shock and disbelief filling the air, I felt a sense of liberation wash over me. The weight of her manipulation, the burden of her schemes, had been lifted from my shoulders. And as I looked around, I realized that I was finally free from her grasp, free from her greed, and free to honor the memory of the man I had loved. With John's spirit as my guide, I knew that I could face whatever challenges lay ahead. And as I stood in the midst of our new home, surrounded by the echoes of the truth I had unveiled, I felt a sense of closure and contentment that I had